Hello, and welcome back to the Transform Wellness Podcast. I'm Dr. Bradford Perkins, a metabolic and longevity expert. Today we're going to talk about cardiovascular disease. What is the true cause of cardiovascular disease and things we can do in our lifestyle to help prevent cardiovascular disease. So we're talking about heart disease because it is the number one cause of death in the United States. That's 1 in every 5 deaths. So if you look at that, that's 2,300 people die per day from cardiovascular disease, which is approximately 700,000 people a year. It is a costly disease to manage. It costs $320 billion to treat cardiovascular disease. And interestingly, women are 10 times more likely to die from heart disease than breast cancer. So it's just as big a deal in women as it is in men. If you look at it, 62% of men, their first symptom of cardiovascular disease is a heart attack. And it's 46% of women, their first symptom is a heart attack. So that's where having the appropriate screening and understanding your risk is really important. We are going to talk about that today. And most people think heart attacks come when your arteries are fully blocked, they're basically closed. That's called stenosis. But actually 68% of heart attacks occur when there's less than 50% blockage in the artery. So, as far as risk factors, there's over 400 risk factors for heart disease. We are going to talk about the top 25 modifiable risk factors today. Genetics do play a role, and then something called epigenetics, how our experiences, our environment are influencing if our genes are turned on or off. So the top 25 risk factors are listed here. We're going to delve into some of the more common ones. So high blood pressure, very common. So making sure we have that under control. Abnormal cholesterol, most of us know, oh, my cholesterol is abnormal, but it's not just your LDL or your total cholesterol. It's your breakdown of your cholesterol, which we're going to talk about. Insulin resistance, high blood sugar, diabetes. Actually, this is probably number one, in my opinion. Obesity by itself, a diet high in refined carbs and trans fats, the standard American diet. And that diet is also usually low in dietary omega-3s. We're just not eating enough cold water fish. Inflammation. Inflammation is probably the driver of most disease, and why we do not have this really long health span is related to inflammation. So understanding that is important. There's others like smoking, high iron, low potassium, magnesium, increased oxidative stress. It's just the stressors inside our body, either from toxins or from our cellular processes. Think of our cells as little engines. It puts out exhaust. That exhaust can be damaging to the body. Immune dysfunction is also included. Going back to lifestyle, lack of sleep, not getting your quality sleep. I have other videos talking about sleep on here. Lack of exercise. So you have the people working long hours, sitting 6, 8, 10 hours in front of the computer, not moving. That definitely increases risk of heart disease. Stress. So not only you're not sleeping, you're overstressed, you're not moving. It's all going into why we're having such an increase in metabolic disease and cardiovascular disease. High homocysteine. Now that's more genetic. There is a genetic component to that called the MTHFR gene. There are a few other genes as well. So if there's a high homocysteine, it needs to be treated with methylated B vitamins. Your low thyroid can increase, is a risk factor. Certain micronutrient deficiencies, chronic infections, and then heavy metals are also there. So lead, very common. Mercury, that's from fish, but lead we would get from if living in an older home. If we were born before 1980, a lot of things we were in our environment had lead, leaded gas, leaded paint. Our toys had lead on them. So, those are certain things we have to think about as well. So as far as cardiovascular disease prevention, 80% of cardiovascular disease is preventable with 5 healthy lifestyle modifications: nutrition, physical activity, smoking cessation, stress management, and compliance with medications and supplements. So what causes heart disease? In this table, it looks very busy, but what I want to show you is the first thing on the list is something called endothelial dysfunction. That is the lining of the artery. So think of our artery is a hose. So the inner lining is one cell layer thick, and it's when that becomes permeable where we can get stuff in the bloodstream into the wall of the arteries when we get heart disease. So part of the endothelium on top of that is something called your glycocalyx. So really you have to damage the glycocalyx and the endothelium first before all these other issues come up with your cholesterol being uptake, immune reaction, and then forming the actual calcified plaques and non-calcified plaques. So what leads to breaking down this layer, the glycocalyx? The number one cause is elevated blood sugar. So in a way, heart disease is related to blood sugar spikes after eating. So the higher the blood sugar spike, the more damage to the glycocalyx. So it's really watching your sugar levels and your processed carb levels are way more important than cholesterol in the diet. Now that's in generality. There's certain people with genetics that really need to be careful with saturated fat, but really the number one thing is blood sugar. So really keeping those blood sugar spikes probably even below 120 after eating if you're wearing a CGM. There are other causes. You can have inflammation, especially from something called LPS, which is lipopolysaccharide. That's made when our gut microbiome, some of the bacteria break down. And if we have something called leaky gut, that endotoxin gets into our body, leading to a lot of inflammation. Smoking, in my area here, there truthfully aren't many smokers, but that is part of the, it does cause a glycocalyx dysfunction, high blood pressure, oxidative stress. We talked about toxins and metals like cadmium and lead, arsenic. Arsenic would be found in rice, and just being sedentary, just not getting your blood moving. Interesting though is shear stress is also a cause of glycocalyx dysfunction. But shear stress is like endurance athletes when they're running marathons and they're training hours on end. All that blood pressure and that going through leads to a shear stress through the arteries, which does break down the glycocalyx. And that's why endurance athletes have an increased risk of heart disease. So when we're looking at our fasting glucose, this is the number you want to look at. So interesting is, most of the time you look at your lab at Quest or LabCorp, it says 100 to 125, that's pre-diabetes. But truthfully, the damage starts way before that. So for every 1 point above 75, there's a 1% increased risk of a cardiovascular event. So, if your blood sugar is 100, that's a 25% increased risk. But then on top of that, for every 1 point above 84, there's a 6% increased risk of becoming diabetic in the next 10 years. So if you're at 100, you're already, actually make this math easier for me. If your blood sugar is 94, you already have a 60% increased risk of becoming diabetic in the next 10 years. And once you get to a fasting blood sugar of 90, you're already having vascular and kidney damage occurring. So a blood sugar of 92 is not great. You want it much lower. And then if we're looking at an A1C, which is your average sugar over 3 months, for every 1% over 5.1, so I kind of look at 5.1, 5.2 optimal. For every 1% over, that's a 40% increased risk for men and a 240% increased risk for women. So sugar is really, really important to keep under control. So if I'm looking at blood tests, I'm going to look at a wide variety of tests. I'm going to get a CBC. I'm going to look at a urinalysis, a metabolic panel. Then something called an advanced lipid panel. That is going to look at all the different sizes of your cholesterol molecules. I do have a video on a comprehensive advanced lipid panels on my YouTube channel. I want to see a full thyroid, magnesium, high sensitivity CRP. That's looking at inflammation. That's a really important test. Homocysteine. Those are my main ones. I do add in others depending on risk factors like a vitamin D. I do apologize. I do check a fasting insulin and A1C in every patient. Some people I do check an omega-3 on. If someone has a really high HDL, I'll look at your HDL function. And for some people, I'll look at genetic testing called cardiovascular by a company in Santa Clara called Vibrant Wellness. I'll look at heavy metals if they've had a lot of exposures. And then as far as looking at the heart, you can do a CT calcium score, which looks at calcified plaque. And there's also a CT angiogram. You can get that added in with AI. That's a clearly CT angiogram, which is going to directly visualize the arteries and looking at narrowing and plaquing. To really get a good idea, blood test, and I want at least a calcium score. Now, if some people have more risk factors, maybe even doing a stress test, referral to a cardiologist. As far as lifestyle, so let's start with nutrition. The main thing is avoiding sugar, avoiding ultra-processed foods. So if you're looking at, the food label, making sure those added sugars are less than 5%, really trying to stay with whole foods. So shopping on the outside perimeter at a grocery store. You do want to eat a wide variety of fruits and vegetables, more veggies than fruits. If possible, aiming for 10 plus servings a day. For our gut microbiome, very important. You want to make sure you're getting enough fiber in the diet. Here in the United States, we are very low in fiber. I think only 10% of people get the daily requirement of fiber, which is lower than I would recommend. I recommend 35 grams of fiber for women, 40 grams for men. You want to make sure you're getting adequate omega-3s or take an omega-3 supplement. And interesting is your order of eating matters. So if you want to eat carbs at that last part of your meal, you want to break your fast in the morning with protein, not with a carb. And then timing of food. I also am a big proponent of time restricted eating. So you want to try to eat, and I like eating earlier. So I like people to eat more of their food in the morning and eat less as the day progresses. That more aligns with our natural circadian rhythm in our body. And time restricted eating, I like a 10 to 12 hour eating window, go down to 8 at times, but doing a 6 to 8 hour eating window constantly every day, that's not enough. Our body was never meant to have that restricted. Cycling on and off. Our body it's used to cycles. It's not like 100% do it this way. So you do want some days where you're 12 hours, some days 9 hours. So it's okay to kind of move around. But having too restricted actually leads to micronutrient deficiencies, protein deficiencies, which we don't want. We want to make sure you have good hydration, and eating all those rainbows. That's our micronutrients. And then eat organic. There's the environmental working group. They have their dirty dozen and their clean 15. So the foods in the dirty dozen, you definitely want to buy organic. Pomegranate seeds are also good for the heart. So, that is something you can add to your diet. EVOO, extra virgin olive oil, about 4 tablespoons a day is good for the heart. You can add that to your salad, however you like to use your EVOO. And then another option is a fasting mimicking diet. True fasting, like a water fast, maybe a couple days. Some people do it that way. Another option is a fasting mimicking diet, where the company is called Prolon, where you have these soups and bars. It's very low calorie, but it helps induce that fasting-like state, and you get the same benefits for autophagy and cell turnover and metabolism and like food cravings and things like that. For physical activity, it's really sit less, move more. So if you do have a desk job, there's I heard this term exercise snacks. So every 45 minutes to an hour, stand up, do 10 air squats, do some desk push-ups. Just want to move throughout the day. You also want to try to get about 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity activity, which is level 2 cardio. So just a steady state. That could be a brisk walk, that could be a light jog, some cycling, whatever gets you there. And then HIIT training, high intensity interval training twice a week is a way to help with that heart rate variability. Balance and flexibility training are going to be important, not necessarily for heart health, but in general as we get older. And then strength training is important, at least 2 days per week of major muscle groups. And I look at the primal movements of squatting, lunging, twisting, pushing, pulling, and carry. Sleep, another really important area of lifestyle. This is, going through the different areas of lifestyle. You want to keep to your sleep schedule as best as possible. So you don't want to like all of a sudden stay up 2-3 hours later on the weekend and then go back. Our body doesn't like that back and forth. This is an area where our body likes to stay in rhythm. So it likes when we sleep around the same, wake up at the same time, go to bed around the same time, eat around the same time. Our body does like that that following of a clock, because our body is a system of clocks. You do want to avoid eating, if you can, at least 1 hour after waking up. You want to limit caffeine after about 12. Now, if you're a slow caffeine metabolizer, you should remove all caffeine from your diet. It does increase risk of heart disease, and I'm one of those people. We talked about time restricted eating. You do want to go outside. If you can get outside in the morning, get about 30 minutes of daylight, great way to reset our circadian rhythm. Daily exercise, this is preferably in the afternoon. Whenever you can get it, you just don't want to do it late at night. You want to be careful with blue light exposure at night. You want to avoid eating 2 to 3 hours before bed, and that includes alcohol. You want to keep your room cool and dark. And then if you're a person that's like, I have trouble calming down my brain, that could be related to stress. That's a whole different talk. But meditation can help. Qigong, deep breathing techniques can help. And speaking of stress management, this is very common in today's world. So, again, deep breathing. You can do box breathing where you inhale, take a deep inhale, but you want to feel your abdomen expand. That's a good deep inhale, not your chest. You want to feel that belly bulge out when you're taking that deep breath. About 4 seconds in, 4-second hold, 4-second exhale. If you can do that 2 to 3 minutes in the morning, and then around lunch, and then around bedtime, huge improvement in stress management. Again, we talked about yoga and Tai Chi, exercise, eating a healthy diet helps with stress management. People do cold plunge and sauna. Actually doing a hobby. So you're working these, really busy, running around with the kids, or you're at work all day, doing all these activities. You get home, it's go, 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 and then it's time to go to bed. But you really need to take time for yourself. So if you have a hobby you like to do, if you like to draw, like to read, like to do woodworking, whatever it is, trying to take time out of your day to do something you enjoy is important for stress management. Some people journal before they go to sleep. Having good social support is also important. So thank you for your time. I hope you learned a lot. And if you want more tips, subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. All right, everyone, have a great day.